Welcome to the ECR Retail Loss, Sell More and Lose Less podcast series. Bakery and fresh bakery is possibly the largest overall category of food waste in a typical supermarket, often accounting for 40% of the total food waste. And there's only so much you can donate around bakeries. So it's a critical category to get right. And in this podcast, I'm joined by Richard Thaleman, food waste advisor to ECR Retail Loss, and we'll be exploring and discussing the findings from our recent meeting where several retailers presented innovative approaches that they're taking to manage bakery food waste. We had our session meeting, I think, a week ago or so, and we were looking at in-store bakeries, specifically the sort of production area in the store. And often bakery can account for about 40% of the food waste in a typical supermarket. So it's a big area from a waste perspective. Clearly, strategically, it's very important for retailers as well to get their bakery section looking great and smelling great. So we heard from a retailer to begin with who just launched a new production planning process and a production planning tool that sort of told the store what you should be baking at what particular time. And then we heard another retailer talking about, how when in-store bakery comes up against the self-checkout, what sort of problems that can create and what some of the interventions retailers were looking at were things that we were discussing. So we sort of beginning and the end sort of thing. We looked at the whole thing, but with two retailers. What were your sort of takeaways on both of them, perhaps?
Yeah, so two great presentations, and I think one sort of just eked into the other, so they all kind of link together, as you would imagine. But as always, I'm always thinking back to getting it back to prevention is always the key to this, and especially with bakery's always been at the heart of freshness and abundance in retailers. So everybody expects it, especially at the beginning part of the day. So it's important to get that right. So I think the first presentation that we saw that was on their forecasting and substitution model, which I thought was very interesting. So
it was, wasn't
it? Having those grouped into those subgroups, it depends, I suppose, on the type of range that you have. But I think they're bang on in having groups of, if it's a white roll, it's a white roll. So therefore, when you get to a point where you don't need to have full availability of everything, you can ensure that you've got one or two of those from that subcategory still on sale. However, I would say, and I'm not entirely certain at what point that kicks in, but it certainly shouldn't be early in the day. We need to make sure that's past the time where people are probably still buying bakery, maybe sort of mid to late afternoon, and then sort of dwindle it down, which would really help on waste, and I can see that. So I thought that was interesting, but I think you always go back to the problem of, colleagues, not the problem with colleagues, but colleagues will think that they know best in stores, and therefore, and in some instances, when you have a forecasting model that tells you pretty much the same thing every day, you'll start just doing the same thing every day and forget to look at the forecast. So I think that's a challenge that nobody's really quite grasped or got a handle on yet and been able to fix. So I think there's still some way to go on that. But the substitution model I liked. I think it was a good option to have towards the end of the day.
I thought it was quite interesting the way that they did say that they were producing various reports. So if the system told you to make 10 yesterday and you made 20, yes, I guess you could then go back to the store and say, well, look, why did you do too few or too many? And yes, maybe look at those in the context of their food waste results. So I suppose they have got a feedback loop as such, yeah, but I guess it's, all after the fact and not.
Yeah, and I think it depends on where that feeds back into. Colleagues are pretty astute in finding out, if that feeding in, I baked 20 yesterday, feeds into the ordering model, they'll do it. If it doesn't, they'll go, well, I'm marking my own homework here. And if I don't want someone to talk to me because I did too many, because I know, that I'm going to sell them, then of course they'll probably just mirror what it told them to bake and just say, well, I baked 10. It's, but and I've seen that in some instances. So I think it's, one of those things that if you could get it full circle connected in with sales, then of course that would be a very beneficial tool to have.
Yeah, and I think underlying here is what one of the issues is around visibility. The central team having visibility to actually what was baked, what was on display at 5 o'clock, what wasn't on display at 5 o'clock, what
Yeah.
was on display at 8 o'clock. I think that lack of visibility. So I don't know whether where we're at in terms of computer vision and other stuff, but potentially that's got a role to play in the future.
Yeah, for sure, and we've seen that in a number of other of the webinars as well. So yeah, I think, and then when we move on to the second presentation, where we're talking about the challenges at self-serve checkouts, I think most retailers will be aware of some of these challenges, and I think for the retailer that's just introducing bakery at the same time as sort of finding the challenges at self-serve, they've just come at the same time. So I think where they've got colleague intervention, because that was driven by the trial stores, because they didn't want people putting the wrong product through. And I think what they called out, which is where they believe that they have this issue, is because the price point goes from something like 19 pence to, I don't know, I think
it was the big range, wasn't it?
Yeah. So of course, they're worried about somebody putting a loaf of bread through for a price of a crusty roll at 19p. So it's a valid point, but I guess you need to actually understand whether that is happening on a grand scale. But the other interesting thing was that they'd set up this subcategory on the till where you could choose to have a mixed bag. Now, from a sustainability point of view, that's brilliant. Getting people to use one bag instead of 5 for the 5 bakery items they've had. But in reality, I think we've educated consumers for a long time now that they know that they might struggle at the till or the checkout. Even the checkout operator's got to open the bag and look in the bag, which some people don't want them doing and rooting around in their fresh bakery items. So they've got this subcategory on the till, which allows customers to tell them everything that's in the bag and then put it on the scale, which could work, but it may feel like it's a bit of overcomplication. And going back to what most people do, having a single bakery item weight in the system just means that you can do the same as you do with everything else on produce or wherever else you have those weighted items. So I think their conundrum was just what should they do? And I think in essence, pretty much what every other retailer does is at the moment probably the best solution that you're going to get by just having single items, having a weight attributed to them. But to your point, Colin, I think cameras, and we've spoken about a number of times before, cameras at the till to identify items. I think if you had that for bakery, but of course it brings back another issue that you'd have to have then is go back round and looking at the bags. I know that this particular retailer has gone from a brown bag to a brown bag, which lots of retailers have now, the sort of semi-opaque window so that you can see it. But of course, a camera would probably struggle to find what that product was through that.
Yes, you probably might come into the same problem you have with peppers, just differentiating between an organic and a normal pepper through sort of product recognition technology. So that will remain a challenge. Well, look, we're doing bakery again next year. We're sort of anniversary this. Every year we'll see what the new innovations are, smart shelves, other ways of using RFID. I know some people are looking at RFID in the bakery area to improve the counting, but it's a great area, I think, for the sort of exploration and innovation, given that is about 40% of the waste, and you really can't donate your way out of this problem.
No.
So thank you very much for your notes, and we'll see you next time.
Yeah, brilliant. Thanks, Colin.
Thank you.
Well, that's all we have time for this week. Thank you for joining us, and thanks to all the ECR Retail Loss community for the sharing of their knowledge, their research and latest learnings that ensure that we become truly a global platform for learning. My name is Colin Peacock. This is the Sell More and Lose Less podcast, and if you liked it, please subscribe so you automatically get all future episodes. And also, if you think your colleagues and friends might also like it, please ask them to follow ECR Retail Loss on LinkedIn and tune in to our next podcasts. If you didn't like it, then let us know and we'll try and fix it. Either way, see you next time. Thank you again.